Okay, this next documentary that I want to review is the Battle of Berlin, the last battle. And it's I write the notes down because I wanted to not go over the same information that I've gone over previous. So I wrote some notes down. There's reenactments, so you actually see reenactments in the documentary. And there's computer-generated troop placements, and you get the lay of the city. There's interviews with Berlin veterans, which I think is really good. Also, something that's not often mentioned in documentaries are the flak towers. There were three. There's one at the north of the city, there's one at the east of the city, and there's one at the southwest of the city. And they played a pivotal role in the Battle of Berlin. These flak towers were so heavily fortified that even heavy artillery shells couldn't really penetrate the walls because of the thickness of the concrete. And this was a vital part of the defence of Berlin. Then we have experts speaking from Sanders. It's a Royal Military School where they teach officers. The defeat and the retreat of the Wehrmacht, or the German forces, was quite overwhelming, especially in 1944. And during this time, Hitler would hide himself away. He was very exhausted at this point and was very ill, as we all know. The odds were just stacked against the German army. I mean, it was like 16 to 1 in tanks. This is the battle for Berlin. 5 to 1 in soldiers. So 5 million troops against 1 million. Air Force 12 to 1. The idea of the fighting to the last man was for several reasons. One was as a result of the trying to get the refugees to escape the Russians. The other was because of you've got the troops that were like the SS, and you've also had foreign troops fighting for the SS, so they wanted to fight to the last. Also, you had these kangaroo courts, and you had these men going around stringing people that they thought were deserters, or they perceived they were deserters, and they would just hang them at the nearest lamppost. There was a saying, enjoy the war while you can, for the peace will be terrible, which is quite fitting, actually. Also, the hoisting of the white flag. Although you do see them around certain districts of Berlin, they didn't want to, you'd have these SS men walking around the city, in case they would see a white flag, and then they would go into the apartment and tell them to take it down. They also were relying on the Volkssturm, which is a kind of a dad's army, which was a bit of a joke, really. But you could see that this was really desperate stuff at that point. And especially if you have men fighting in the areas of where they live, I mean, that must tell you something. And but the success of the Panzerfaust said a lot. They said that they lost about 800 tanks in the Battle for Berlin. It's a lot of tanks, considering the battle only lasted for about 10 days. Seelow Heights. Now this is, I mean, I could do a YouTube clip just on the Seelow Heights. It was General Heinrici, who was a brilliant strategic general, and he knew the lay of the land, and he knew how good the Seelow Heights were to defend, and he was known for his defensive tactics. So when they did an artillery bombardment, what they did was, or what he did was, he would withdraw the troops, and then once the artillery bombardment was over, he'd move them back into position again. So when the Russians were approaching, the Germans were ready for them, and this did cause a delay in the attack for Berlin, because once they got past the Seelow Heights, then there's no stopping the Russians getting to Berlin. So that's why the Seelow Heights were a very strategic part of the battle for Berlin. And Heinrich didn't want another Stalingrad, so he deliberately had his troops bypass Berlin. On April the 26th, the Russian bombers and artillery shells were bombarding Berlin at that point, and Mussolini was strung up, and of course when Hitler knew of this, he was determined not for that not to happen to him, so that's why he was going to take his own life. They had King Tiger tanks, which is unbelievable if you think about it. The King Tiger tank was a very, very powerful tank, and they were using that all the way to the end of the battle. And the end of the battle was, I think, on the 3rd of May. It officially ended on the 2nd, but there was fighting still going on the 3rd. And they were also fighting with foreign troops. So they actually had foreign troops fighting in Berlin. You can't make this up. But this is a brilliant documentary. I highly recommend it. In fact, I recommend all the documentaries that I've spoken about. But this one holds a lot of weight. So if you ever get the chance to watch it, I recommend it highly. That concludes the review.